he gets a lot of slack for that internet thing, but it was a joke from what he
Exactly.
says.
And it's consumers.
What about the stated goals of President Trump, whether he's achieving them or not? One of them is actually protect or bring back manufacturing jobs onshore of the United States. Is that a sensible goal? And by the way, how is it affecting the auto industry? Because the auto industry supposedly is one of the
Yeah.
beneficiaries of all this.
Yeah, the auto industry actually is sort of case in point for, this is not actually working. And it's for the auto industry, a lot of it has to do with the fact that there isn't a U.S. auto industry. There's a North American auto industry. It's very integrated with Canada and Mexico. Parts of an individual car may cross a border 7 or 8 times before you end up with a finished vehicle. And all of this stuff is adding costs. So the auto industry is particularly ill-suited. Steel and aluminum. What do you make cars out of? And we have tariffs on steel and aluminum.
Could there be an ironic, unintended effect, which is actually as you put more and more pressure on the costs for manufacturers, they automate more. So it doesn't turn into jobs. It might turn into GDP, doesn't turn into jobs.
Well, just in general, even aside from the cost pressures specifically, if you ask yourself which industries might be induced to come back to the United States, it'll be industries where the labor cost disadvantage is not too large. We're not going to be bringing back apparel. There's just no way, unless you have just hundreds of percent tariffs, that we're going to bring clothing manufacture back from Bangladesh to the Carolinas. What you can bring back conceivably are industries where they're very capital intensive. Robots do a lot of the work. So we may be creating more jobs for robots,
Yeah,
but not a whole
exactly.
lot of jobs for U.S. workers.
There is
Exactly.
the effect, apparently, we hear from Secretary Besant.
That's exactly it. That's exactly the whole problem with this whole thing. I mean, this idea that there's a solution here to this problem that manufacturing jobs have disappeared. There isn't. If hypothetically, imagine a scenario where America reshores a lot of the work in manufacturing and everything. It'll be done by robots. It's not gonna. It's gonna create a lot of jobs for robots, but not people. Humans need not apply. So I mean, this he's right. He's completely right on this one and completely reasonable, despite his negative reputation, especially on this corner of the web. And everything, and what he says about this whole thing, about this whole idea that you can just tariff the jobs back into existence, like the president has a magic wand that he can wave and raise those tariff rates, and that's gonna, magically negate the complex supply chains that are at hand behind all of it. Where one country, where we, this is the economy is hyper complex. I mean, a lot of the like I said, I mean, a car, and its parts might cross the border 7 times on its way to becoming a manufactured part. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, because the whole thing is optimized to save as much money as possible, and to do it with in the countries that are most well suited and set up for it, and then bring it home, and auto industry has not benefited from these tariffs, not really, and on top of everything else that I'm saying in my argument, like Krugman points out, if in a hypothetical scenario where the United States reshores a lot of the work that's been automated to China, much of that work is going to be done by machines and not people. And he does make a good point about apparel. Those jobs are, yeah, they're never coming back. Like nobody's going to be making money. Yeah, it's just not happening. And this idea that you, like, to me, it just strikes me. Everybody's always saying the economy is too complex for a human to wrap his head around, and everything. It's too complicated. It's too complicated. These politicians, they want to control it. They can't be choosing. It's too much for any one person to fully understand. Well, if you want to make that argument, then why do we think that there are simple solutions like tariffing shit? Obviously, that's way too simplistic to actually succeed at much of anything. In what it is, it's a fucking 19th century protectionist idea. That we aren't even living in that world anymore. At all by any stretch of the imagination. and everything, and that's what gets me about the education system. He makes a very good point in all of this. Like, you're preparing kids for a job in a factory that they're not going to be doing for the most part.